I'm James Ezimoha. Welcome to Africa News, where we'll bring you the latest updates from across the African continent. Let's see your headlines. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces signed transitional constitution toward forming a parallel government.
By those of Sudanese Army General.
South Africa's Ramaphosa and Mozambique's Chapo meet to reinforce long-standing trade ties. Activists protest outside courthouse over alleged conspiracy by politicians and journalists. Thank you for joining us. We begin in Sudan, where Rapid Support Forces have signed a transitional constitution, marking a step toward forming a parallel government amid ongoing conflict with the army. The document outlines a federal secular state split into 8 regions, with a single national army formed from its signatories. With no clear timeline for elections, the RSF-led government is expected to take shape in the coming weeks.
We will establish a national army, a professional army whose mission is to protect Sudan's international borders and national sovereignty and to protect the democratic system. It will not be a regional or a partisan army. If we fail to establish secularism in the permanent constitution, then the Sudanese people have the right to exercise the right to self-determination as a genuine democratic right and a human right.
The nature of this state?
The nature of this state is a secular, democratic, decentralized state. This is the first time in the history of Sudan that the Constitution has provided for a secular state. The Constitution establishes 8 regions in Sudan. 3 members will represent each region in the House of Regions. The Constitution also establishes a presidential council of 15 members. 8 of them will be the governors of the 8 regions.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 17 people have been confirmed dead following last week's deadly bombing in Bukavu. Families gathered to bury their loved ones as the government reported nearly 100 others suffered injuries. With no group claiming responsibility, grieving relatives are demanding answers and peace.
Tears and frustration marked the funerals in Bukavu as mourners laid victims of the deadly attack to rest. The bombing at Independence Square left at least 17 dead, with dozens more injured, according to officials. Photos of the deceased lined the ceremony, as loved ones pleaded for the government to restore security. One victim's brother described the pain of losing a loved one in the attack.
We have lost a family member, my older brother Bruno. He was visiting our younger brother when he was trapped and killed in the explosion. At the moment, we are very worried. Very worried. We ask our government to guarantee us peace. Peace, please. Right now, we are going to the burial in our village in Kabamba. We plead with the government to help us. Let these killings stop.
The region's vice-governor confirmed the casualties and burials.
There were 17 deaths. 11 were recorded on the spot, but others died at the hospital. And today, we are going to bury 12 people, because some bodies were already buried, and others are still at the hospital receiving care. After the departure of all the authorities, these criminals took courage and luxury in committing a cowardly act by dropping bombs on the population. And that's why we are here, because you see that the world must honor them. They are our brothers. We are here just to accompany them in the funerals, so that we can organize these funerals that are respectful and especially with dignity. That's why we are here.
The Bukavu bombing is yet another blow to Eastern Congo's fragile security. The attack remains unclaimed, deepening concerns in a region already suffering from years of violence.
We move to Somalia, where the World Food Programme says 4.4 million people could be at crisis levels of hunger in the coming months due to drought. Meanwhile, aid cuts are already impacting critical health responses, with the World Health Organization warning of disruptions to Ebola surveillance in Uganda.
There's another drought here.
A worsening drought in Somalia is set to deepen the country's food crisis. The World Food Programme says the number of people facing acute hunger is projected to rise from 3.4 million to 4.4 million by mid-year. Aid agencies are already struggling to meet needs, with funding shortfalls limiting assistance. World Food Programme officials say new data shows food insecurity is on the rise in the region.
We have new data from the IPC, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System. A recent report estimated that about 3.4 million people are currently facing acute food insecurity in Somalia. That's going to rise to about 4.4 million in the next few months. So that was 3.4 million between January and March. So that's the current number. That number will rise by 1 million between April and June. So that's imminent.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization warns that U.S. aid cuts are affecting efforts to monitor and contain Ebola in Uganda, forcing the agency to take on emergency roles it does not typically handle.
I think the U.S. funding freeze has affected key outbreak response capacities for the current Ebola disease outbreak due to Sudan virus in Uganda. WHO has had to step up and cover areas it usually doesn't support, and that does include biological sample transport and logistics, and the deployment of surveillance teams to points of entries.
WHO is also directly hit by U.S. funding cuts, with Trump ordering a withdrawal from the agency in January.
In Tunisia, activists protested outside a courthouse where opposition leaders are on trial for allegedly conspiring against state security. The case involves 40 figures, including politicians and journalists, with many already jailed or in exile. Critics say the trial is politically motivated, deepening concerns over President Kais Saied's rule.
Tensions flared in Tunis as protesters gathered outside the courthouse, denouncing what they call a politically driven trial. The case targets 40 individuals, with 8 appearing before the judge in the first session. Rights groups say it reflects Saied's tightening grip on power since he dissolved parliament in 2021 and sidelined the judiciary. Opposition leaders argue the charges are meant to silence dissent as Tunisia's political crisis deepens.
Today, the government can no longer tolerate opposing views. It can no longer bear different opinions. And that is why it wants to exclude all its opponents, leaving only one voice in the country, which is the voice of the government. Therefore, this case involves detainees from various political and ideological spectrums, and no party has been excluded. Thus, it is clear that the government's intention is to exclude the opposition.
Today we are all politicians. We have no crime, yet we find ourselves walking to the courts facing heavy charges with harsh sentences awaiting us. Despite this, we remain steadfast and came on our own feet to enter the trial.
With most major political figures either jailed or exiled, critics say the country is sliding further away from the democratic gains. Meanwhile, the government insists it is upholding the rule of law.
In Gabon, interim leader Brice Oligui Nguema, who took power in a military coup in August 2023, has confirmed he will run in the country's presidential election set for April 12th. His candidacy follows constitutional changes, allowing him to enter the race. Nguema led the coup that removed President Ali Bongo in August 2023, ending over 5 decades of family rule. The move was widely supported due to economic struggles under Bongo's leadership. However, last November, a new constitution was introduced as part of Gabon's transition to democracy. While it barred interim leaders from running, an exception was made for Nguema. Observers are now watching to see whether the election will mark a true democratic shift. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa hosted newly inaugurated Mozambican President Daniel Chapo for closed-door talks in Cape Town. The leaders discussed trade, investment, and regional cooperation as both countries navigate economic challenges.
brother.
Mozambican President Daniel Chapo, on his first official visit since taking office, met with President Cyril Ramaphosa to discuss political and economic cooperation. South Africa has invested up to 175 billion rand, about 9.45 billion US dollars, in Mozambique, creating over 42,000 jobs. Both presidents highlighted the significance of South Africa's historic relationship with Mozambique and the importance of continued cooperation.
Our relations are historic, and they are even more important now as we face trying economic conditions. So today's working visit has been an important one, which will pave the way for state visits on both sides and for our binational commissions to do real work.
We are here to talk about our relation, political relation, diplomatic relations, and you know that South Africa is Mozambique, Mozambique is South Africa. We are brothers. That's why we want to talk about our economy, our political situation, our diplomatic situation and relation. You know that we have Maputo corridor. In Mozambique we have ports, we have Limpopo borders and Rasan Garcia borders. We are here to talk about private sector and public sector and how we can do to grow up our economy.
The two nations also share key trade corridors, including the Maputo corridor, which is vital for transport and energy security.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have today on Africa News. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.